We're now going to take a look at the NiTE type, beginning here first with Brian Josephson.
The evidence that, for example, someone may have made a mistake, and in response to all these possible flaws, the design has been improved.
So vultologically, we already see here the lowered upper eyelid, the hypnotic gaze. Moving closer into the face, you can see it even more clearly here. The upper eyelid is lowered over the eyes. The area around is taut very sharply. And here you have this 4-point folding, creating this sort of sneering, snarling effect. So see the asymmetry here, and then the head shakes.
Well, in the case of ESP, they're not.
And you can see the wobbling lips very clearly here.
25%.
There, for example.
Say if you were guessing 1 out of 4.
Up here and down here, you have this tension pulling.
The actual average is about 1 in 3.
Okay, so vultologically, we can see that he's a very clear NiTE. He has the hypnotic gaze of NI, he has the inertial energy, the fixed forward gaze, the diagonal eye drifts of PI, and he has the wobbling, asymmetrical, candid emotive expression style of FI. All the signals let us know that that is an NiTE type. Now we're going to listen to what he has to say.
Well, I think it is clearly interesting to know if things like telepathy exist. In fact, the whole world, well, all sorts of things would change if we accepted that paranormal things happened and that there were connections between us.
So, telepathy?
So on. There have been legitimate criticisms of the evidence that, for example, someone may have made a mistake.
So what he's talking about here is evidence from experiments done decades ago, where they tried to figure out whether a person is capable of knowing things in a way that is beyond random chance. And he describes an effect that was measured, which seems to be a bit more than chance.
Biased the, put down recorded results wrongly, or there may have been fraud and so on. And in response to all these possible flaws, the design has been improved, so it's now much better. For example, it may all be run by a computer. There'll be a push a button or something to indicate which choice. So it's become a much tighter subject, and that has not made the results go away, whereas if it were not a real effect, you would think that if you tightened the procedures, the results would disappear.
I'm going to put here scientific experimentation.
Well, most of them do, really. There's telepathy and remote viewing and so on. I think staring effect.
Remote viewing. And he's talking about the staring effect, which is called the psychic staring effect. And that's the idea that you can sense when somebody's looking at you, even though you don't see that they're looking at you.
To some extent, but I think some experiments have a certain power, maybe some kind of subtle energy, if that exists, which is helping things go better. Yes, sort of. If it were an experiment on electrical conductivity, you might imagine a person who is sort of.
You can see there his snarling smile.
You might imagine
that one right there. The way that he sneers when he smiles, it's very characteristic of the TE and FI.
A person who is sort of introducing charge into a situation and increasing
conductivity. It's just as a metaphor.
Yeah.
And the sassy head shakes.
Well, in the case of ESP, they're not weak. I mean,
ESP is extrasensory perception.
The actual average is about 1 in 3. Yes, well, if you look into the figures, you find that you have to do about 100 trials before you can the difference becomes significant. Well, it's part of the ethics of the field that you don't fail to publish something because it gives.
Okay, so that's Brian Josephson. Now, where have we seen this pattern before? He talks about telepathy, the paranormal, how there are connections between us, and he conducts scientific experimentation on those connections. This all sounds exactly the same as what we saw with the first NIFE sample we saw previously, and that is Rupert Sheldrake. In fact, I want to replay part of this clip for you real quick.
And I'm developing a range of automated telepathy tests so that people can do these anywhere.
So he says he's developing a range of automated telepathy tests. So again, you have scientific experimentation on telepathy, which is exactly what we see with Brian Josephson. So not only do they look the same, but they're also talking about exactly the same thing. It's like they are the same person, except one of them is an NIFE and the other one is the sister type, the NITE. Now, I want to pause here for a second and mention that Brian Josephson is somebody that I did not know about up until just a few days ago. Somebody else sent me the video and I saw that he was NITE, and then I noticed that he talks about the exact same things as Rupert Sheldrake and Roger Woogler and Robert Gulick. And so this is yet another case in point for the predictability of the model. This individual was not in the database. I did not know about him. Now I come across him, and lo and behold, his psychology matches to a striking degree that of somebody else who we do have in the database. And this is not an isolated event. This happens all the time. We get new samples all the time, and they always seem to reaffirm the patterns that we're talking about in these videos. By the way, Brian Josephson is a Nobel Prize winner. We read here that Brian Josephson is a British theoretical physicist and a professor at the University of Cambridge for physics. So let me add that here, theoretical physicist. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1973 for his prediction of what came to be known as the Josephson effect. He shared the prize with another physicist for their work on quantum tunneling. Let me add that there. I'm also going to add here professor. So as a Nobel Prize winning theoretical physicist, we know that this is a serious-minded person, and these investigations are also taken with the same level of gravitas. So there seems to be something about NI leads where they implicitly sense that the structure of the universe is a certain way, and they're trying to investigate that structure. But okay, I'm going to leave that here for now with Josephson and move on to the second sample. This is Robert Anton Wilson.
In around 1973, I became convinced for a while that I was...
So first of all, the hypnotic eyes, you can see very clearly the lowered upper eyelid. As for the mouth tension, you can also see the wobbling lips, the way that they kind of softly move around. And you can also see that there's generally a containment of the mouth within this vertical space. Now, another way that you can discern TE is with the voice. They usually have a nasally pinched voice, which sounds a bit like this, and you can hear that within him as well.
Time I started reading neurology, and
you hear that nasal pinch voice.
Decided it was just my right brain talking to my left brain.
And he also has this kind of stumpy, slumped body energy where it's very inertial and very dense. So that all lets us know, just like with him, that he is an NITE type. So now we're going to pay attention to his psychology.
In around 1973, I became convinced for a while that I was receiving messages from outer space.
Receiving messages from aliens in outer space. I have to explain a few things about Robert Wilson. So for those who don't know, Robert Wilson is a novelist, and he talks about how the ideas and the content of his novels arrive to him from either aliens or some sort of divine source, some transcendent source. And this is one of the books that he wrote. Here you have an eye symbology. There's a lot of third eye symbology in his work. You can see the third eye symbology in this image here, but you can also see it in other novels. For example, these are some other ones from him. There's the Schrodinger's Cat 2. Here you can see the Eye of Horus inside of a triangle. Now, I haven't read the books myself, but I know that the subject matter of them deals a lot with the Illuminati. For example, this one is called Cosmic Trigger, Final Secret of the Illuminati. And he also has other books such as this. Here again, you see the third eye symbology within a triangle. This one's called The Widow's Son, Volume 2 of the Historical Illuminatus Chronicles. And he has other ones, for example, here, Prometheus Rising, as well as The Earth Will Shatter. So I'm going to write here, Novelist, Illuminati series, Schrodinger's Cat series, Prometheus Rising, The Earth Will Shake. And as far as motifs go, I'm going to add third eye symbology and pyramid symbology. Okay, now that we have some context for Robert Wilson, I'm going to play the video again.
In around 1973, I became convinced for a while that I was receiving messages from outer space. But then a psychic reader told me I was actually channeling an ancient Chinese philosopher, and another psychic reader told me I was channeling a medieval Irish bard. And at that time, I started reading neurology, and I decided it was just my right brain talking to my left brain. And then I went to Ireland, and I found out it was actually a 6-foot-tall white rabbit. They call it the puka, and the Irish know all about it. So it depends on who I'm talking to, which of these metaphors I use to explain where these weird patterns come from that jump out of the books and take hold of the readers and change their lives.
So what he's saying here is that when he's consulted psychics and shamans and so forth, they all give him a different explanation for where it is that he's channeling this information from. Now, that doesn't mean that he believes necessarily in the explanations that he's being given by these psychics and these shamans. However, regardless of how they explain it to him, one thing is pretty clear: he believes in the experience that he's having. He just doesn't know how to describe it, and other people are trying to help him describe where it's coming from, and they have different guesses. And although he may be more agnostic as to what the guesses are or which one is real, and what he's not questioning at all is the fact that it happens to him. He doesn't question the fact that he's channeling. He's just not sure what the source is of what he is channeling.
Patterns come from that jump out of the books and take hold of the readers and change their
He calls them patterns, patterns which jump out of the book and change the reader's minds.
their lives. It's not me, it's a 6-foot-tall white rabbit from County Kerry. We're only different in the left hemisphere.
So he's got a bit of sense of humor there.
We're only different in the left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, we all share in the same morphogenetic field.
The collective unconscious.
And the collective unconscious.
Morphogenetic fields. Collective unconscious. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the genic aspect of morphogenic refers to like genesis, the origin, the inception, and morpho refers to morphology. In other words, the nexus, the starting point of a given morphology, the origin point of a structure. That's morphogenic, and a morphogenic field refers to the way in which, let's say, an embryo's cells start differentiating from just being stem cells to forming a kind of core structure of, for example, the limbs and the head. All of that kind of starts with an essential shape, and that essential shape is what cascades forward into the evolution of the organism. Now, psychologically speaking, morphogenetic fields reminds me of another place in which we see the word morphology, and that would be here with Rupert Sheldrake, where he talks about morphic resonance. So in Rupert Sheldrake's case, morphic resonance refers to the way in which the morphology of a certain phenomenon, the structure of it, will cause other related phenomenon with a similar structure to resonate with each other. And here with Robert Wilson, psychologically speaking anyway, there is some overlap between the two concepts.
We're only different in the left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, we all share in the same morphogenetic field.
The collective unconscious.
And the collective unconscious.
So if I'm understanding him correctly, the reason everybody is affected by the patterns is because the way that it affects our collective unconscious, which is, he's describing it as being more right brain, compels us all into that experience because we all have a similar isomorphic structure to that area of our brain, whereas the left brain, being more analytical, more rational, is different in all of us and isn't having that experience.
Well, you know what Freud wrote about projection. The people, yeah, I have been accused of being a fanatic in the Skeptical Inquirer, but you just have to open that journal to see the people who put it out are all fanatics. And the people who accuse me of being possessed by devils are all the type of right-wing fundamentalist who rolls around and speaks in tongues. And
so he's accused of being possessed by the devil, which I can see why some people might give him that stigma, because he has very archetypal, numinous, thematic elements to his work, and the collective unconscious and the symbology of the collective unconscious is often interpreted as satanic by certain kinds of religious traditions.
gives all the signs of being possessed by the devil themselves. So I tend to look at, I think basically I'm a mirror. My books are mirrors, and when a monkey looks in, no philosopher looks out.
So he says my books are a mirror?
Well, that is one of the difficulties. That's why people get embroiled in weirdities while they're reading my books, because I'm dissolving the difference between the inside and the outside.
I'm dissolving the difference between the inside and outside?
Like most people think their head is inside the universe, but I have demonstrated in several of my books that the universe is inside our heads. Our head is outside the universe.
The universe is inside our heads. Where have we heard this idea before? We heard the very same idea by NIFE Robert Gulick when he talks about how you walk around in your own matrix. This idea of each one of us being a whole dimension. It's a very panpsychic idea. And now there was another part of this that he said,
The universe is inside our heads. Our head is outside the universe.
our head is outside the universe. It's hard for me to understand what this phrase is saying. How can there be anything outside the universe? But maybe if we keep listening, he'll clarify.
This whole studio, for instance, it's got to be inside my head, and it's the same with the whole universe. The whole universe is a model contained in my head, which
Okay, following so far, that's the panpsychic idea.
contains a model of my head. So I've got two heads, the head outside the universe and the head inside the universe.
Okay, so in his head, there's a universe. In that universe in your head, there's a model of you. And then in that model of you, there's a brain. But in that brain is not you, because that brain that you see is actually a model. So that's what he's saying. That makes more sense.
Now, that should be perfectly clear, but if it isn't, Bertrand Russell has a proof using six-dimensional geometry.
Six-dimensional geometry?
In his book, The Nature of Human Knowledge.
Okay, that brings us to the end of Robert Gulick. And I think we have a pretty fair grasp of his psychology. This is a lot of motifs. So, wow, we're actually seeing a lot of convergence between Robert Wilson and Robert Gulick. Here we have six-dimensional geometry. And here with Robert Gulick, we have geometry, sacred geometry, and higher dimensions. And we also see geometry with Robert Wilson in things like the pyramid symbology, which is a triangle symbology. So, okay, that brings us to the conclusion of Robert Wilson. Now we're going to move on to the next sample. This is Rampal Ji Maharaj, who I understand is considered a religious saint.
परमात्मा स्वयं आकर के हमें ज्ञान देते हैं कबीर हरि के नाम बिना ये राजा रसब हो.
Starting with his Vultology, we already see here the hypnotic eyes, the tautness of the perceptual area, while the pretarsals, which are the eyelids, have a hooded effect to them. Now this video is a little bit lower resolution, but you can see, for example, in this photo, that hypnotic lowering of the upper eyelid. Now, as far as the judgment axis goes, we can see here that he has these asymmetrical wobbles that happen. For example, there, here, there, and there. You saw that? There again. So we can see that he has that candid emotive expression. It's uncoordinated with the hypnotic eye. So this is very clearly a gamma type. And you can see by his abundantly zoned out stare, forward fixed gaze, and the inertial body that he is a PI lead. So we have another NiTe here. Now, because I don't understand the language, I'm going to rely on external sources to help supplement his psychology. We can go to this website here, which appears to be the official website for him. And we read here that Saint Rampal Ji Maharaj is the greatest spiritual leader who has told the right way of worship about real God Kabir with proof from all holy scriptures. Jagat Guru, he is a spiritual leader. And it says here that Saint Rampal is making people free from all sorts of evils, and that his followers have stopped consuming intoxicants and non-vegetarian food. Vegetarian diet. And here it says that all famous foretellers have predicted about Saint Rampal being the one who will bring peace to the entire world and make this earth like heaven. So bringing peace to the entire world and making this earth like heaven. Jagat Guru Rampal, true spiritual leader and avatar of the Supreme Almighty God. Avatar of the Supreme God. Saint Rampal has provided authentic answers to all the questions that remained a mystery till now. Who is the Supreme Almighty God? From where have we come? Why do we face problems? Why do we die? Is there a land devoid of sorrows, old age, and death? And how can we attain a plentiful and immortal abode? So this is a lot to summarize, but I'm going to summarize it like this. Firstly, there's a focus on theology and metaphysics. So in the most general sense, I think that captures the essence of what he's about. Now, as far as his actual video goes, since I can't understand the video and there was no subtitles, I actually had somebody translate the video for me, and this is what they came up with. So he's saying, by not worshiping the Divine Lord, by not praying, the king also will get a life of a donkey. Now, virtuous souls, you should understand, by this one example, the Divine Lord himself comes and gives us knowledge. Kabir says that without worshiping the Lord, even the king becomes a bull. So this is speaking about reincarnation. By not listening to satsang, we don't believe that in the next life we will take birth as animals and birds. We keep thinking that we will get a human life in the future also. No, don't do this mistake. And if anyone gives such knowledge, then he is ignorant. So let me just stop right there. Here he's talking about reincarnation, and he's saying that if you think that just because you were born as a human being, that when you die you will reincarnate into another human being again, then you're wrong. It depends on whether or not you are a virtuous soul and you pray. So I'm going to add here the importance of prayer and virtuosity, and also reincarnation. That gives us enough information about Rampal. The next sample we're going to look at is Adida Samraj.
I'm reminded of the arguments.
Really quickly, already we can see the hypnotic eyes, very strongly lowered upper eyelids, and also the sharp perceptual area and the orbital area. As far as the mouth, you can also see the tension that's up here and down here.
That go on in the public world.
Can you see there and here?
Evolution.
Yeah, there they are. And there, you see the mouth wobbling? Yep. So you have the mouth wobbling and you have the tension. So we can confirm the NiTe Vultology. Let's take a look now at what he has to say.
I'm reminded of the arguments that go on in the public world about evolution. Is it natural selection, or is there some creator God, and all this kind of amateur exchange?
So he says that debates about evolution or God are amateur exchanges.
Based on no comprehension of reality itself at all, in any fundamental and comprehensive and ultimate sense.
Based on no comprehension at all of reality itself in any absolute sense. Now that word absolute is important here because Adida Samraj claims to know about absolute reality. So let me put here knowledge of absolute truth. And you can see that, for example, if you go to this website called adidam.org, dedicated to Avatar Adida Samraj and his reality way. So I'm going to put here Avatar Adida Samraj. Notice that Adida is called an avatar, but Rampal Ji Maharaj is also called an avatar of the Supreme God. He was also a prolific author, and he wrote a magnum opus called the Aletheon, which is essentially his revelation. And we can see it here, and it's subtitled The Divine Avataric Self-Revelation of His Divine Presence, Avatar Adida Samraj. And just to see how thick this thing is, you can see it here. It's a very long volume. So I'm going to write here, spiritual author. The Avataric Self-Revelation of His Divine Presence. So continuing.
But in that complexity of argumentation and all the fragments of thinking that go along with it, one of the arguments typically associated with Darwin is the idea of natural selection, that in the plane of the body, exchanges occur, and these produce changes in form based on a selectivity in the breeding process that selects for certain traits that are found to have survival value or whatever. But there are many dimensions to living existence.
Many dimensions to living existence.
So there is a mind dimension, a subtler dimension.
There is a mind dimension. Again, we see the word dimension come up as we saw before with Robert Wilson here, 6-dimensional geometry. And we also see overlap with what he said here, where he says the universe is inside our minds. So there's a mind dimension, the universe is inside our minds.
And there are associations and exchanges there too. And they engage in their own habits and natural selectivity and so forth. And they have a controlling effect.
Notice his pendulum swing. He has a little bit of PE energy, but it's nowhere near enough to be at conscious levels here.
A causative effect on the gross then too. And then deeper than that. So there are many levels, you see. There are even molecular and cellular levels from which governing patterns arise.
So he talks about how things exist on many different levels. Patterns arise in molecular and cellular levels.
So if you want to just come up with a reductive theory for everything, you're like Evelyn and his balloon theory of everything.
So he's against reductive theories.
Or his theme park theory about the nature of the universe, you see. And it's just fixed-mindedness and ego-based thinking.
So ego-based thinking, this is actually one of his hugest points in all of his work. He didn't talk about it in this video, but a lot of what he talks about in his other videos relates to letting go of the ego, or something which he calls self-contraction. So for instance, we read from Wikipedia, self-contraction. Adidas says that what keeps human beings from experiencing this ultimate enlightened reality is the activity of the ego, which he states is the source of all emotional, psychological, and spiritual dissatisfaction, leading people to believe that they are limited, suffering individuals. And he says that all efforts to unite with the divine is actually coming from a point of view that is already false, because you already are the infinite. In other words, separation is an illusion already, so there's no point in trying to unite because you're already united. So the point is not to unite with the infinite, it's to simply let go of the illusion that you have that you are separate from the infinite. So I'm going to put here, release the ego, self-contraction, let go of the illusion of separateness, realize that you are already united with the infinite. Perfect. Okay, I think that gives us enough information about Adidas Samraj. All these individuals that we're going through could be talked about in much greater depth. But I want to stop here with this shade because I think we have enough information to summarize what it is that we're seeing as far as this mystical, esoteric shade. Now, like with the NIFE types, we see themes such as telepathy, a connection to the paranormal, things affecting each other at a distance, such as with extrasensory perception. We also see a focus on structure and morphology and other things like geometric shapes, such as with the pyramid symbology. But there's also something that we didn't see so much with the other ones. For example, with Rampalji Maharaj and Adidas Samraj, what we see is that they both believe themselves to be an avatar of the divine. So when there is esoteric beliefs, it's seen as much more physically true, whereas with the NIFEs, there's a little bit more of a tendency to see things as emerging from collective consciousnesses, or to see things as being more so generated by the intersubjectivity of minds. So NIFEs believe more in reality co-created by interlocutors, and how we perceive reality is how it becomes. The NITEs seem to have actually more of an absolutist understanding of reality. So that actually makes them more esoteric in the sense that if they happen to be esoterics, they view that as in a much more factual way, which I think is the difference between FE and TE psychology. All right, so having seen this NITE mystic shade, we're going to now focus on other shades of NITE because, of course, they're not all mystics and gurus. And we're going to begin here with Sandy Monroe, who is an engineer that works in automotive.
There are at least 30 Chinese car companies that would definitely be able to take a shot at not just Tesla, but Ford.
The placement of the camera in this video is not the best, so he's kind of looking a little up. I think the chair that he was sitting on was a little low. But here you can see the sharpness around the eyes, the tautness, as well as the upper eyelid covering part of the eye. And he also has the wobbling lips, for example, here.
General Motors had about 50%
Yep,
market share.
very wobbly. He also has the nasally pinched voice. Listen here.
When the Chinese start showing up. People that talk about companies and whatnot.
So that shows us the NiTe Vultology. Now let's look at the psychology.
There are at least 30 Chinese car companies that would definitely be able to take a shot at not just Tesla, but Ford.
So I'm going to start with engineering, automotive industry. And he says that 30 or more China companies can take a shot at Tesla and everyone.
Thinking that the good old days are going to stick around is ridiculous.
He's very future-oriented and progressive in how he sees that the automotive industry is going to evolve. And he basically says that all these dinosaur companies, all these legacy automotive companies that are still pursuing the fossil fuel gas engine vehicles rather than the electric vehicles are going to be left behind. He also says that companies that are not doing AI, such as the up-and-coming self-driving of Tesla, are also going to be left behind. So he's looking to the future. So I actually want to put here futurist because that's what he is.
I can tell you that in the 70s, in the early 70s, General Motors had about 50% market share. Now they got 14. Watch how that shrinks when the Chinese start showing up.
So market share, numbers.
people that talk about companies and whatnot that are really exciting to them, the number one is NIO. But Geely's already here. They own Volvo. BYD, BAIC, Shanghai Automotive. There's a ton of cars that are going to be coming in our direction. And I'm telling you what, there's going to be a ton to pick from, and they are really good. No bad gaps in panels. They've been taught by, oh yeah, me.
So what he does, his specialty, he helps auto companies, up-and-coming auto companies, retool their system and basically succeed in engineering a car and getting it to production.
It used to be that BYD was borrow your design. Those days are gone. If you start thinking for a second, just for a second, that the Chinese are just a flash in the pan or they don't have anything truly to offer, remember, we have virtually no battery manufacturing here.
So here we're seeing a little bit more of that mechanistic mindset, essentially saying all the chess pieces are in place for China to explode in this department. So I'm going to put here market predictions and forecasts. Well, that brings us to the end of Sandy Munro. So that was a bit refreshing, right? We got to see a different expression than the previously mentioned shamanic guru shades. With Sandy Munro, we see a more proper TE-oriented NiTE, which is about engineering and mechanics, but he's also got this tendency to look into the future, to project into the future and see where things are going to head. And he's already aligned with that future that's about to come. And we're going to take a look at that here with Fabiano Caruana.
I've worked with a lot of grandmasters over the years, which has been very helpful because every player has a different way of viewing the game.
The game he's talking about is chess, and he is a chess grandmaster. So here we read that Fabiano is an Italian-American chess player and a prodigy. He became a grandmaster at the age of 14, which makes him the youngest chess grandmaster in history. Chess prodigy, youngest grandmaster in history.
I've worked with a lot of grandmasters over the years, which has been very helpful because every player has a different way of viewing the game. In terms of my current situation, I just find it very comfortable to work with Rustam. I think we get along well, and we also achieve a good amount of work. And I think we have a pretty high level in terms of our analysis and our work ethic. I think it's just more something that you practice and then you get better at it. But in general, the stronger you are, the better you will be at noticing the times when you should press the computer a bit more to analyze this position rather than just assessing which is the most practical way. Like,
learn from mentors, uses computer analysis to assist.
If something is objectively not that great or leads to a draw, but you know that your opponent just won't be able to find that. And a lot of our analysis I do just ends with like, okay, this is new. It's a new idea. They won't expect it because the computer doesn't show it. And you have to make a ton of difficult moves.
So his strategy is to make unexpected moves that are not showing up in the computer?
Yeah, I mean, if I think at the end of the day that something will work, it doesn't really matter to me if this is going to be novelty of the year or if people will write online that it's already refuted, that it's so obvious that it's deadlocked. A more personal decision from my side. U.S. chess changed very dramatically over the 10 years that I left the Federation in 2005.
So he just continues talking about the general field of chess and so forth. But at least we got to see an example of an NiTE when they are younger. In his case, he has more in common with Sandy Munro. In the case of Sandy Munro, he's an engineer and he analyzes and predicts where the engineering field is going. He also uses a lot of predictive capacity in chess, which in itself is a very predictive game. We're going to move now to our last male NiTE sample, and this is Quinn. This is a volunteer, so thank you very much, Quinn, for allowing us to add your video here.
This is a really big question for me right now because I'm...
Notice the mouth asymmetries, the candidness of the emotive expression. Here, for example, he has a bit of a pull, and here he has a bit of a snarling tension. And down here you can also notice he has pulls down, so he has pulls up and pulls down, and the lips are wobbling around as he shakes his head. As far as his eyes go, you can see a subtle raising of the perceptual area, while the eyelid slightly covers the top side of the pupil. But now notice the energetics. Notice how long and steady he holds his gaze, and notice how stumpy and slumped his energy is. It's a very inertial energy and very fixed gaze. So again, young people look like this. It's not just age that makes the NiTEs look this way. This happens at whatever age they're at, as we can see with him. So we can see the gamma functions pretty clearly, and the energetics are also very solidly PI. And as far as what he says in the video,
This is a really big question for me right now because I'm currently considering what to do with the rest of my life. I'm 33. I've been to college twice. And what that basically says about me is because I've been to college twice and I don't have a career I've ever made out of what I've done in college, my work in college was kind of useless.
Been to college twice. My work in college was kind of useless. The choice of the word useless here is a selective framing, which goes back to the meritocratic motif that we saw with the TE and I's. Success, failure, thinking of things in terms of achievement or non-achievement.
So I went to college for initially political science, and then East Asian studies.
So political science, East Asian studies. So political science has overlap with all the conductor types, which are all very political in nature.
Along the way, because I couldn't get through the political science career. I tried. I did try. And what I encountered when I tried was that political science is just not a good career path for me. It was a bad move. I decided I didn't want to be in charge of people. I didn't want to be influential in society in an interpersonal way, in an interpersonal context, because I started thinking of it as dirty.
Didn't want to be in charge of people. I believe what he means by dirty, if I'm not mistaken, is the kind of cunning that it takes to maneuver people, to move social dynamics. And he didn't like doing that. He didn't like the social relation PR stuff within politics.
I was an English teacher in South Korea for a while.
English teacher in South Korea?
I ran into problems there too. I had a boss. She was a petty boss. And by petty, I don't mean that she was a petty person, even though she was a petty person. She was my kind of intermediate boss between the teachers and the franchise owners, and she had a lot of crap that she did with the staff, and she kind of segmented people in ways trying to manipulate them. Her tactics were very poor. I saw through them all. So I ended up quitting there.
So he had a petty boss, which was a petty person, and he saw through her tactics. This again brings us back to the idea of feeling that social relation tactics are dirty. Now, this has parity with what we saw originally in the TESI videos with Tucker Carlson here, where he said, not giving emotional control of yourself to others. There's a tendency to dislike what are probably essentially FE maneuvering, handling tactics. They don't like to be manipulated and gamed by that social dynamics. They resist it, they find it dirty, and they find it offensive. So that brings us to the conclusion of the NiTE males. We got to see one major shade with the guru and shamanic types. Then we got to see a more engineering heavy shade with Fabiano and Sandy. And here we see a more political shade with Quinn, who studied political science. So we're moving on now to the NiTE females, beginning with Sarah Coakley.
I'd like to try in this short introduction.
So first of Vultology, we can see right away a very lowered upper eyelid and a very sharp area around the eyes. Very textbook NI gaze. And as for the emotive expression, we can already see some asymmetry developing on this side. You can see the pulls going up and down, as well as the wobbling of the lips. For example, here, oh, you saw that going like this? Yeah, very clearly wobbling lips and 4-point tension with the eyes. This is a very clear gamma type and a very slouched inertial body energy. So that gives us the NiTE Vultology. How about the psychology?
I'd like to try in this short introduction to say something about the main doctrinal moves in the first volume of my systematic theology, which is called God, Sexuality and the Self.
God, Sexuality and the Self. And she calls it a systematic theology. Sarah Coakley is an English Anglican priest, a systematic theologian, a philosopher of religion, and an honorary professor at the Logos Institute. So, Anglican priest, systematic theologian, philosophy of religion, honorary professor.
And then at the end, I'll retroact to what this means for the methodology of systematic theology for today. This volume is actually the first in a planned 4-volumed series, and where to start is always a very fascinating question in any kind of theological approach. What is surprising to many is that I start with an insistence that what I call contemplation, which is not intended in any kind of elitist way, but rather is a description of any form of prayer which hands over control.
Contemplation, any form of prayer which hands over control to God.
Leaves enough space for God to be God, in order that we may truly connect with that without which there would be nothing at all. That this contemplation must be the ascetical practice which undergirds any future project of systematic theology. But the reason why I think the question of ascetical contemplation has become so crucial for me personally and in the context of contemporary discussion is that it is a way of making it utterly clear that in the project of speaking of God, one is handing over to that God on behalf of whom one attempts to speak. And unless there's enough space in one's prayer for one's own human monologue to be interrupted by then theology always is in danger of it just becoming another form of human persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
so in other words, it has to be experiential. It can't be a rational persuasion, something of an argument that you agree with. She wants to bring back, highlight the experience of prayer and contemplation as a means of knowing into the practice of religion, rather than being, as many theologians might be, more cerebral about it. So I'm going to put here experiential knowing, not human persuasion.
Now, I also have a particular set of theoretical worries which are brought to bear in relation to systematic theology.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the video. We got to see another religious NiTe, but this time she was a priest rather than an avatar. This next sample is Justine. She is also a volunteer, so thank you so much, Justine. Notice that she has a very fixed forward gaze, a very unmoving body, very stumpy and still and sedentary, with the tendency to diagonally drift to the side and then come back forward. You can see the wobbling lips very clearly here, by the way. There, for example. Yeah, up here and down here. Now let's listen into what she says.
I guess when someone's being really irrational, usually I get really confused.
When someone's being really irrational, I get really confused.
Like how they're coming up with their observations, their conclusions, irrational and not really making any sense. And reactive, and they just keep reacting and projecting everything in their surroundings.
Dislikes those who are really emotional and reactive.
On rare occasion, I meet people that are very calm, level-headed, and they're very logical, and just.
So she likes calm, level-headed, rational people.
You can tell they're very emotionally secure, and they're just coming from a really good faith. And usually when I look at those people, and then for example, I could be at a big event, and then someone disrupts the event, and then that person can kind of just stay calm and cool, and then still respond to the person with so much understanding and empathy. I admire that.
Emotionally secure people. Perfect. Okay. That's about as much as I can gather from this video. The last sample we have here is Rebecca Solnit, and she is an NiTe Seelie.
So yeah, no, it is absolutely about power, but particularly about how power relates to truth and fact.
Notice first the voice. She has that very airy, sprite-like voice, as we saw with the Seelie types earlier and also with Anne Romney.
The story that this person assaulted me, or the story of this is the science of how reproduction and abortion happen, or the reality of climate change.
So, abortion rights, climate change. We read here that Rebecca is an American writer, and she's written on various subjects, particularly feminism, the environment, politics, and art. Environment, feminism, place in art, and a writer.
What just happened. And reading it again on the train, getting ready for this conversation, I was really struck by how over and over it's about people who've become so powerful they can prevent certain things from being heard and force things that are not true to be propagated. And so it's very much about that kind of power and how destructive it is.
So you're seeing a lot of crusading of values, a lot of pointing out the injustices in society, and it's something we see in Seelie types more generally. This focus on things that are not kind, things that are not empathetic, things that are not loving to do.
And often that is the property of white men, not always. There are other people with vested interests in controlling women's bodies, controlling the news, protecting the guilty and assailing the innocent. As not a new movement, but a particular stage of feminism. Feminism from 2012 or 13 on had really reached a new phase, and people like Bill Cosby had been exposed before Me Too happened. What is shocking when you look at Bill Cosby, at Harvey Weinstein, at Jimmy Savile, at the BBC, at so many of these people, is that their predatory campaigns were able to go on uninterrupted for decades because they had so much power and their victims had so little power that they were able to prevent these people from speaking up.
Power disparity caused opportunity for abuse. We actually saw the same thing said by other TE leads, such as Tom Hanks, if you remember. But okay, we'll stop right here. Now we have a view of what the NiTe looks like in both men and women, young and old, Seelie and unseelie. And with that, we're going to move on now to the next type.